Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 8 of Book Musings. In this episode, I'll take a look at another Stephen King novel. This time around, we'll take a look at 11/22/63. So I alluded to this one in the previous episode. So in the previous episode, I discussed, I don't know that you can see it on the camera, but one of my many Stephen King novels that I have now, Duma Key, was the subject of episode 7. I had alluded to how I was probably going to do an episode on this or read this one next, and sure enough, I did read it. It took no time at all. I flew through this one. I'll elaborate on how quick of a read it was as I proceed here, but I'll do what I usually do here. I will offer a little bit of background. I guess I already did in terms of why I came to this book and read this book. I'll give you a little bit of info in terms of what happens in the book, so there will be some degree of spoilers, I suppose you could say. I'm not going to get too much into like the plot itself, but you will get a kind of general sense of what's going on. So just FYI on that. And then I'll offer naturally, right, my musings or some thoughts I had on the novel. And this one, as we'll see, kind of stands out in terms of at least what I'm familiar with respect to King. It definitely stood out in my mind. And so I'll go through some of the reasons for that. And then, of course, I will offer my book musings grade for the novel. We'll see if it reaches the Book Musings Hall of Fame and perhaps even the highly coveted top shelf. So stay tuned for that. So that's the agenda. I'll go ahead and just say a little bit more about the background and in terms of why I read this novel. And I kind of talked about a lot of this in the 7th episode of Book Musings when I talked about his other novel that I read right before this, again, Duma Key. I had a long bout of basically just reading nothing but nonfiction and finally decided, let's change it up a bit. I want to read some fiction. And my wife actually commented on it because she's so used to me just reading, philosophy or just nonfiction stuff. And I mentioned in the Duma Key episode that another sort of habit of mine is always having a pencil no matter what I'm reading, and I'm marking everything up. And just like as was the case with respect to Duma Key, I didn't have a pencil when I read through 11/22/63 either. So yeah, taking a little bit of a break, I suppose you could say, from the nonfiction and reading some fiction without the pencil. Mentioned Duma Key. So I hadn't read Stephen King for a long time. I won't go too much into like my history with Stephen King since I already alluded to a lot of that in the previous episode 7, again on Duma Key. But I had just read Duma Key, and again I was considering which of these two novels to read next because I wanted to explore King a little bit more. And so again I settled on 11/22/63. One of the reasons why I was really taken with this one, I do like the general plot line. The main character having to go back and try to undo the JFK assassination. That's intriguing in and of itself. But then, in conjunction with the fact that I had recently read, probably less than a month ago, in fact, still, Lance DeHaven Smith's Conspiracy Theory in America, which is the subject of episode 6. And he talks, basically one of the main themes throughout the book, as I elaborate on in detail in episode 6 of Book Musings, is his idea that our notion of conspiracy theory and how we receive them is in large part a byproduct of the CIA's efforts after the Kennedy assassination to squelch alternative theories of what happened, right? Theories other than the lone gunman, Oswald being the lone gunman. So the CIA initiated all these attempts to, again, minimize, demean these alternative theories that were popping up left and right about what really happened. And so, again, DeHaven Smith kind of chronicled that process, gave a lot of, an interesting account of, what transpired, shortly after the assassination. So I was already kind of familiar, I guess, recently with the subject, and it was interesting to me. And so then to hear that King had written a novel on that very subject, well, of course, great timing, and obviously I was pretty interested in it. And so another reason why then I steered towards this particular novel. I guess that's all I'm going to say in terms of, I mentioned again, I talked a little bit about my background with Stephen King in the previous episode, so check that out if you're interested in that. But So that's all I'll say, I guess, with respect to sort of what brought me to the book. I want to move on to discuss briefly kind of what the book's about. Again, I'm not going to dive into any great detail about what transpires here, other than to kind of talk about, I guess, the general plot line, right? Basically, it follows this dude named Jake Epping. Well, at least he starts off as Jake Epping in the year 2011, which, by the way, is when King wrote this novel. It was 2011, so 10 years ago from when I'm recording this. So Jake Epping, through another character, discovers basically this time warp, bubble sort of thing where you go into it, or I'm not going to go into too many details, but basically it allows you then to go back to this very specific point. I think it was in 1958, I believe. There's a very specific point. It always brought you back to the same point, and then you could also then come back to 2011 by going to the same spot in then 1958. So anyway, that's the general sort of plot line, I guess you could say. And when he then goes and travels back to the past, he becomes George Amberson. And so that's most of the novel. I would say 80% of it takes place back in the past. And so not just 1958, but then as he's living in that past time. And by the way, I thought it was kind of interesting, the rabbit hole, he calls it a time warp that he has to sort of, I think it was like descend these stairs. He calls that the rabbit hole. Going down the rabbit hole, going into the past. You never know. I guess the idea is, right, you never know. And changing the past, you think you're just changing, and this is one of the themes I liked in the novel, you think you're just going to change sort of one thread of history by altering this one event. But in fact, no. Even seemingly very minute alterations can have all sorts of unanticipated effects, in various different manners. And various avenues of life that are totally unanticipated. So I really like that, which I guess goes into I wanted to speak to, what's going on philosophically here. Well, that very idea was fascinating to me. I thought a lot about that sort of thing as I read through the novel. Kind of the whole idea. He references the butterfly effect throughout the novel. How just very minute, and you don't have to buy into that whole idea of time, time travel and so on. I mean, to contemplate the philosophical significance of the idea of the butterfly effect, right? That one sort of deciding to do one thing instead of another, and even in a seemingly minor sort of situation, how that can have drastic effects in all kinds of, again, unanticipated ways. It's a very philosophical topic, again, that I reflected on as I was reading, throughout the novel. And of course, in the main character, Jake, or I guess George, right, he uncovers how that's the case then more and more as the novel transpires, because again, he doesn't anticipate a lot of the other kinds of effects that happen as a result of him tinkering with history, if you will. And so I would say, I guess, in general, that I felt like, at least with respect to what I'm familiar with in the King canon, or what he's written, at least, again, what I'm familiar with, there's probably a little bit more philosophical going on in this novel than some of the others, which are maybe more horror or supernatural in theme, right? At least that's the way I felt, that there was, that I felt, compared to, for example, Duma Key, the novel I read previous to this one. I found myself, reflecting in a philosophical sense a lot more this time around with the concepts that are brought up in this. Again, the butterfly effect, that's a very philosophical notion. The idea of time travel, it might sound kind of, in some sense, is that supernatural? It's certainly kind of science fiction-y at this point, but as opposed to ghosts, for me, there's a distinction between time travel and ghosts and some of the other things that happen in some of his other novels. To me, again, time travel, it might sound crazy to us right now, but is it completely out of the realm of possibility? Maybe it's supernatural to us right now, but that seems to be the sort of thing that at least there's some realm of possibility to it, as opposed to something at least in my mind, more than, say, something like ghouls and ghosts and all the other kinds of supernatural stuff that sometimes, or that he's known for, let's say. So yeah, seemed a little bit more philosophical. So that obviously, being philosophical myself, right, I enjoyed that. And again, I definitely thought about the butterfly effect. Was, it's nothing new to me. I had thought about that before, but again, just really thinking about how even very minute choices, seemingly very minute choices that we make, right? Randomly walking into a bookstore, let's say. This is an example I came up with. Well, maybe you meet your significant other, right? And if had you not just randomly decided to walk into this bookstore you'd never been into before in some city you're visiting, you would have never met him or her. Again, it's seemingly a very minute sort of decision, as opposed to like squeezing the trigger, and killing someone. Obviously, that's significant, and that's going to have all kinds of effects, right? But even like my point is, even a seemingly minute decision can have this kind of butterfly effect, can have very significant effects in a wide range of ways too. So again, the novel really got me thinking about that sort of thing. So I enjoyed that. I guess I'll go ahead and move on to some general thoughts I had, or some musings, if you will. So I already mentioned how this definitely stands out. Again, I'm not that well versed in King's, works yet. I've read a fair amount. I would say maybe like 5 of his works, 6 of his works total throughout my life, and seen a fair number of his novel or movies and TV series. What was the one I just watched? Gerald's Game. Just watched that the other day. So I'm familiar with a fair range of what he's done, and in my mind, at least, this is unique in the sense that it reads more like not what he's known for, say horror or supernatural sort of stuff, and that not every novel of his gets extremely supernatural by any means, but that's what he's kind of known for, that horror sort of stuff. This was definitely a change of pace. It seemed different from that. It read more like a suspense thriller adventure sort of book. Honestly, like it had an adventure sort of feel, which had I not read some reviews going into it, it would have completely surprised me, given what I'm used to with King. So really liked that, and he demonstrates his versatility, I think, in writing this novel. At least he did to me. Not only is there that adventure element of adventure, and constant sense of being in trouble and what are we going to do next, but then you have that he also throws in some romance, which he's not necessarily known for. At least I don't associate romance with Stephen King. So I thought this novel also demonstrated, again, versatility on his part, and he does it well. I would have to say that he's able to take on these different sort of genres, I almost say, in a effective manner. He does a great job, I would say. So yeah, there's a good deal of suspense in this. I found myself flying through it, turning the pages very quickly. Read it just as fast as Duma Key, if not faster. It is longer than Duma Key. I think Duma Key was like 611 pages or something like that, and this one's like 849 pages. Okay, so it's 250 more pages, but it's similar, pretty lengthy. But you don't really, that doesn't bother me when I'm flying through it anyway. So definitely felt like this was a quick page turner. I will say that, so one of the things King is known for is a lot of characters, and I guess that comes with the territory, right? You write a almost 1,000-page book, and some of his books are 1,000 pages. In fact, Under the Dome, which I plan on reading next, is I think that clocks in at 1,200 pages. So maybe it comes with the territory. You write a book that big, that long, I should say, you're going to have probably a fair amount of characters. And so one of the things he's known for is character bloat, if you will, a lot of characters. And so as opposed to Duma Key, I had mentioned when, reflecting on Duma Key in the previous episode, that wasn't at all the case in Duma Key. I will say that I did feel that in this one. Again, maybe that's just part of the territory, clocking in at over 800 pages in this case. But it is what it is. There were several times that I remember, coming across a character that, he hadn't mentioned for, let's say, hundreds of pages. I don't know for sure how long, but it had been a while. And, I'm like, who's this? Shoot, who was this? And so I'd sit there and, do I want to worry about this, or should I just move on? Should I try to figure it out? Sometimes I'd flip back trying to find this name. And, there were times where I couldn't find it and just had to move on. And then oftentimes, later, given something that was said, it would click. And then sometimes King would say, like, when he would mention a character, he would say, the guy that, I met in Anderson back 3 years ago. He would sort of say something that would jog your memory. Oh, that guy. But sometimes he wouldn't. And then again, in these cases, it was frustrating because there would be times when I would try to figure out who this character was and couldn't find it. So, to me, there's a simple solution to that. And one of the things I thought about was it would be so helpful just to have, literally, you only need like a page. You don't have to tell me everything about the character, but just like a reference sheet somewhere. You're giving me 800 pages filled with characters. Give me just a reference sheet, either before or after, where it says Billy Bob, dude in Anderson that he runs into on the corner, in 1959. When he's on his way to meet Sadie. Sadie's the girl, by the way, that he falls in love with. But anyway, a simple character reference sheet would have been very handy, and it would have taken care of the problem just like that. The frustration would have been gone just like that, because all it takes is a quick turn of the page to that reference sheet. Oh, boom, right back. Right? And in Under the Dome, he actually does precisely that. He actually offers a map, which is pretty cool, of the location, Chester's Mill in Maine, and then he offers, just what I was talking about, a kind of reference, some but not all, of those in Chester's Mill on Dome Bay. So I would have liked to have seen, it would have been very helpful if he had done something like that in this one. So I wanted to mention that there were a fair amount of characters, and sometimes that was an issue. Just point out again that one of the things that appealed to me, and I alluded to this in the previous episode when talking about Dunaki, that I don't like the supernatural sort of stuff. So one of the things that appealed to me then was that this had very little of that. You could consider, I suppose, again, time travel, supernatural, at least at this point it seems to be, right? But who knows what the future holds in terms of that. But other than that, and that, he really doesn't do too much time traveling in the novel either. It's just, in fact, again, 80% of it is spent back, again, him just kind of living in that past. So there's not a lot of back and forth. So even that element you could construe as supernatural, again, time travel. That's a major part of the plot. But even that's, it's not constantly shoved in your face, I would say. So the supernatural elements are very much minimized in this work. So if you're like me and you don't like too much of the horror, supernatural, ghouls, ghosts, demons sort of thing, then that's definitely an asset of this one, I would say. So one of the things I thought was really cool about this one was the afterword. I really enjoyed reading through then, and it wasn't super long, it's just like 5 pages, but reading from King himself, right? Not indirectly through the characters, but from King himself, reading and learning about the process leading up to, and then actually writing the novel itself. He clearly did a ton of research for the novel. He talks a little bit about that, but then it's also interesting, as I alluded to in the previous episode, how I think he's a smart guy. Hearing his opinions then, and after doing all that research in terms of what he thinks really happens, and I get that you get that more directly than you can kind of infer what he thinks given what the characters do and say, but you never really know, right? They're characters in a work of fiction. So I thought again that Afterword, where you get that sort of direct communication from him, was very insightful. I enjoyed reading that. I thought it was interesting or curious that King is very much a believer that Oswald acted alone. So he buys into the Warren Commission, the report, right? But the CIA, according to the Haven Smith, right, tried to uphold and then squelch all the other theories, right? King endorses that, right? He thinks that is really what happened, that Oswald did act alone. And then he points out, though, that his wife, Tabitha, who's also a novelist, disagrees, though. She's on the other side. So I found that interesting, and I enjoyed that he shared that as well. So, again, unlike a lot of the book musings episodes where I go through the book extensively and share all kinds of quotes with you, I'm not going to do that here, but I did want to reference in that afterword where he kind of captured what I just mentioned about sort of his general position after having done all this extensive research and writing this novel, and captures kind of his position and also juxtaposes it with, again, his wife. So in the afterword, he writes, quote, Early in the novel, Jake Epping's friend, Al, puts the probability that Oswald was the lone gunman at 95%. After reading a stack of books and articles on the subject, almost as tall as I am, I'd put the probability at 98%, maybe even 99%. So he says that on page 845. And then he says, the next page, quote, a contrarian her whole life, Tabitha is, it does not surprise me and should not surprise you, on the other side, on the side of the conspiracy theorist, end quote. So that was, again, page 848. So she's on the other side, doesn't buy the Warren report, the commission, or what they suggested, all right, and instead, I guess, is on the side of the conspiracy theorist, right? But there's something else at play. There are more people involved, right? There's more than the government's letting us on to believe it. And by the way, one other element of the plot that I would just mention, kind of going along with this idea, well, how likely was it that he was acting alone? So again, the general idea is, well, Jake/George wants to go back and undo the assassination by basically, right, more or less taking out Lee Harvey Oswald, right, before he can then kill JFK. But before he does it, the whole one of the main sort of aspects of the plot is he's got to prove that he's solely responsible, right? He doesn't want to go and kill Oswald if there's, right, if it really is, as he claimed, just a patsy, right? If there's somebody else pulling the strings, then Jake/George doesn't want to kill Oswald. So, and he refers to this in the guy that introduces him, Al, the guy that introduces him to this time wormhole sort of thing. They refer to this as the window of uncertainty. They got to eliminate this window of uncertainty, right? They want to bring up the percentage that he acted alone, right, from 95, which is where they're kind of at, right? They want to go back and make sure that it's, 99% sure, right, that he's acting alone, and then they would feel okay then, I guess, taking Lee Harvey Oswald out. So I just wanted to reference that. That's kind of what he's up to through a lot of the novel, is following Oswald around. It's kind of, fascinating to and that's the sense in which it's kind of an adventure, right? Follow him, following Oswald around, trying to ascertain again whether or not he was the lone gunman or whether or not there were other people involved. So, yeah, so again, Jake/George is trying to eliminate that window of uncertainty. I guess that's really all I had to say in terms of general thoughts and musings as I are in response to the novel. I'll go ahead and turn to offering my book musings grade. So some general thoughts with respect to the grade. Again, this was a really quick read, enjoyable, one that I would recommend to almost everyone, including those who aren't necessarily Stephen King fans. So those who aren't, again, typically King fans. So I mentioned in the previous episode, I had actually read off something my mother had mentioned in a correspondence regarding Stephen King, and she had alluded to, so this is in the previous episode on Duma Key, episode 7. She had alluded to how she no longer reads him because she finds him just too much detail, and she didn't like the endings and so on. So she had all these issues, and I even recommended it to her. I just sent her a text last night saying, look, you might still enjoy it because it doesn't seem to be bogged down in too many details. I would say, Duma Key, I mentioned how that was a little bit palpable at times, that it seemed like you had some unnecessary details. I wouldn't say that's the case, really. I never really felt like that was an issue at all reading through this one. So I didn't think that was the case. And I don't think he butchered the ending either. I thought the ending was pretty interesting. I kind of liked how he wrapped it up, actually. It wasn't... I really had no idea how he was going to end it, given sort of what transpired. And it certainly wasn't necessarily, what I thought was going to happen. So I didn't think he butchered the ending by any means. So some of her chief complaints, I thought, weren't applicable to this work at all. And again, it has a very unique feel with respect to his other works. So again, I'm trying to think, who would I not recommend it to? Maybe the Stephen King fans who are into the supernatural stuff, the horror kind of thing. Maybe that faction of his fan group would be less likely maybe to like. I mean, you still have strong writing throughout. He's a master of his craft. Obviously, great character development, just as was the case in Duma Key. Same thing going on here. So if I mean, who would maybe not enjoy the book, or at least as much? Maybe that faction again of his fans, but otherwise, again, even people that aren't necessarily Stephen King fans, I'd say, hey, you might still want to check this one out because it is very unique, at least in my opinion, in my experience with respect to King's works. Okay. Oh, I guess I'll just point out then that also kind of along those lines, I think it's arguably his most accessible novel as well. Because again, it isn't just all about scary stuff, right? You do have this constant sense of adventure, and then that element of romance is very strong here. In fact, his romantic feelings are very much constantly. There's this tension with respect to these romantic feelings he has, and then his sort of duty to humankind, if you will, and given some of the things that happens, and that's a very intense sort of experience, and it was an enjoyable ride, going along with him, having to traverse that difficulty. So lots of good stuff here. Again, very accessible in the sense that you have other elements here than maybe you usually do in a Stephen King novel. So lots of good things to say. A few bad things sprinkled in there. Again, some character bloat. But in general, I very much enjoyed my experience. I'm going to give it a solid B. So better than my grade of Duma Key, which again for me felt started off extremely strong. I really enjoyed that novel, but then really waned toward the end when the supernatural stuff began to become very prominent. This one started off strong, stayed strong in the middle, and then all the way to the end. So didn't take me long at all. In fact, I would say maybe less than a week, something like that. Didn't take long at all to read it despite its length. Again, very fast read. So strongly recommended. Giving it a B. Doesn't make the Hall of Fame. Again, I'm reading a lot of good stuff here, right? But that is a solid grade. Very good book. Again, highly recommend it to almost everyone. It's hard for me to even think of it. Even the Stephen King fans that I mentioned who are into the horror stuff, I mean, they're probably still going to enjoy this. It's still well written, still has awesome characters, still has you turn the page fast. So, yeah, I guess I'll wrap it up with that. I'll end the episode as I usually do by discussing what's on tap, so to speak, what I plan on reading next. Or at least what's on the horizon, what are some of the possibilities. And so I alluded to some of these. Let's see, I'll start with Stephen King himself. Probably going to move on to Under the Dome. I want to read, I think, at least one more before maybe I move on to something else besides Stephen King for a while. So maybe, I think this one, just again, the plot seemed interesting to me. Read some good things about it. Also read that it wasn't supernatural. So I think I might tackle this one. I also acquired a copy of The Stand, though, so that one's also very much a possibility because that is considered by a lot of people to be his masterpiece. It was written very early on in his career, but it's held up throughout time. I mean, it's been reprinted numerous times. And what's interesting about The Stand is when he initially published it, he was forced back when he didn't have quite the reputation yet, he was forced to cut almost a third of what he had, like 400 plus pages. I think that was originally published in 1977. And so fast forward 15 years, he becomes, very famous, has tons of different, bestsellers. And he then re-releases The Stand complete and unabridged with the 400 plus extra pages. So that one weighs in at, I think, 1,200 plus pages. So, it's interesting. It has a little bit of a background too, but The Stand's always really held up there in very high regard. Kind of it are the two I think I would say, at least in my experience in researching King, are held up as his two biggest, two most well-respected, I guess. But that's certainly debated. In fact, I've encountered a lot of debates about what are the top Stephen King works, and I enjoy reading some of those discussions as well. But at any rate, so that's maybe The Stand, but probably Under the Dome will be my next King work, and that will probably be what I read next. I mentioned in the previous episode how I want to look into memory more. I've always suffered from a terrible memory, and so I purchased some books on the topic that were well reviewed, and so I look forward to maybe tackling some of those as well. Another one, so we were in Lawrence recently with an extended family, went to a used bookstore and came across this gem, which seemed really interesting, The Science of Fear by Daniel Gardner. And so I might take a look at this one too. That's one of the things that I've been interested in recently is the degree to which fear really controls a lot of our, sort of dictates not only our behaviors, but also our belief formation as well. It's something that I've given a lot of thought to. So again, he does a lot of research on that. So I'm very interested to see sort of what the science is telling us about fear. And then I guess a couple of last mentions here would be one thing is one of the courses that I might be teaching here on the horizon around the corner at Johnson County Community College is ancient philosophy. And so in view of that, Walter Kaufmann, very well respected figure in Nietzschean, Friedrich Nietzsche, famous philosopher at the end of the 19th century. Kaufmann's particularly well regarded in Nietzschean scholarship. That's how I'm primarily familiar with him. But anyway, he and this Forrest Baird dude put together this anthology with respect to ancient philosophy. So I might be reviewing that, reading a lot of that in preparation for this ancient philosophy course, which I plan on teaching again in the near future. And the last thing I guess I'd mention, as I mentioned in the previous episode, is I've been reading / I guess I should say listening to a couple of audiobooks. Have been finally tackling the Harry Potter series. I'm still on the third book, The Prisoner of Azkaban. So I'm going through that as I'm doing stuff around the house. And then also I mentioned how I'm reading / listening to The Republic by Plato on my runs. And so I'm actually just finished, was it book 7? No, book 6. So I'll be starting book 7 next time around. So more than halfway through The Republic, been listening to that again when I've been exercising. And so books, by the way, back in that time, just refer basically what we mean by chapters. Anyway, I guess that's it. So that's what's on tap, more than likely for me in terms of what I'll be reading next. That's it for the episode 8 of Book Musings. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, we discussed 11/22/63 by Stephen King. Fascinating novel. Very much enjoyed it. Highly recommend it to pretty much everyone, and gave it a B. Solid novel. So thanks for tuning in. Appreciate it.